Part 1. My name is James, and until recently, I thought I had the perfect life. I was married to Elizabeth, the woman I had fallen in love with in college. She was everything to me: beautiful, kind, and full of life. We had been together for over a decade, married for 8 years. Our life was the kind that people envied. We lived in a beautiful suburban home, took extravagant vacations, and hosted dinner parties where friends and family admired our relationship. Elizabeth worked as a marketing executive, while I had a steady job in finance. Together, we made good money, allowing us to indulge in the finer things in life. Despite the routine of our daily lives, I never felt bored. I loved our morning coffee talks, our late-night drives, the little notes she left in my work bag. We were happy, or so I thought. Elizabeth, on the other hand, had begun showing signs of restlessness. I noticed it in the way she constantly checked her phone, the way she seemed more distant, how our once passionate nights became less frequent. I chalked it up to stress. She had been working longer hours, often claiming she had business meetings or office events. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? Then, everything changed. One evening, after Elizabeth had returned late from one of her supposed business meetings, I found her phone buzzing on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. I glanced at it out of habit, expecting to see messages from her coworkers or friends. But the name on the screen made my blood run cold. Jake, Bar and Grill. I didn't know any Jake. And why was a bartender texting my wife at midnight? Curiosity and fear gripped me. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest, before picking up her phone. The messages were there, flirty, suggestive, unmistakably intimate. My hand shook as I scrolled through the conversation, my world crumbling with each word. She had been meeting him at the bar near her office. At first, it seemed harmless, just drinks after work. But as I read further, I saw the truth unfold. Their conversations were full of secrets, stolen moments, and passionate confessions. I wanted to be sick. My Elizabeth, the woman I trusted with my life, had been sneaking around behind my back. When she came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, she smiled at me like nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. I knew I had to confront her. And I knew this confrontation would change our lives forever. The next day at work was a blur. I sat at my desk, staring blankly at the spreadsheets on my screen, unable to process a single number. The betrayal gnawed at me like a disease, making it impossible to focus. I kept replaying the messages over and over in my mind. I had copied them to my phone, needing proof in case she tried to lie her way out of it. Should I wait and gather more evidence? Should I follow her, see if she met up with him again? Every fiber of my being screamed at me to confront her that very night, to demand the truth, to make her look me in the eyes and confess. That evening, as she walked through the front door, kicking off her heels with a sigh, I placed her phone on the kitchen counter in front of her. Elizabeth, who was Jake? She froze. It was only for a split second, but I saw the panic flash across her face. Then, just as quickly, she composed herself. Jake? What are you talking about? I opened the messages and turned the screen toward her. Don't lie to me. Her face paled, and for a moment, I thought she might faint. Then, the excuses started. James, it's not what it looks like. He's just a friend. I don't know. I was being stupid. I shook my head, my heart pounding. Stupid? You were sneaking around behind my back. You were flirting with him. I never slept with him. She blurted out, her eyes wide with desperation. I swear, James, it was just texting, just a little fun. It didn't mean anything. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But the messages told a different story. Fun? Fun? You were planning to meet him at a hotel. My voice cracked as I threw the phone down. How long, Elizabeth? How long have you been lying to me? Tears welled in her eyes. A few months. But it was never serious. I never actually went through with it. I stared at her, my mind racing. Was she telling the truth? Was she just testing the waters, seeing how far she could go without actually crossing the line? Or had she already crossed it, and I had simply caught her before she could cover her tracks? Either way, the damage was done. The trust we had built over years of love and devotion was shattered in an instant. I don't know if I can forgive you, I whispered, my voice raw with emotion. Her lip trembled as she reached for me, but I stepped back. James, please. I love you. I made a mistake. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned and walked out of the house, needing air, needing space, needing to escape the suffocating weight of her betrayal. As I drove aimlessly through the dark streets, one thought consumed me. Had my marriage just ended? Part 2. I drove for hours that night, my mind replaying everything I had just uncovered. The city lights blurred past as I tried to convince myself that this was just some horrible misunderstanding. But the texts were burned into my memory. She had planned to meet him. That much was undeniable. By the time I pulled back into our driveway, it was nearly 2 a.m. The house was dark, except for the dim glow coming from our bedroom window. I hesitated before stepping inside, bracing myself for another confrontation. But when I walked in, the house was eerily silent. Elizabeth was curled up on the couch, still in the dress she had worn to work, her face tear-streaked. An empty bottle of wine sat on the coffee table beside her. She must have heard me, because she stirred slightly before opening her eyes. "James," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I thought you weren't coming back." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I sat down in the armchair across from her, my hands clasped together as I studied her. She looked exhausted, broken even, but I couldn't tell if it was because she regretted what she had done, or because she had been caught. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I finally said, my voice quieter than I expected. Elizabeth sat up, rubbing her arms as if trying to shield herself from the weight of my words. "I know I hurt you. I was stupid. But James, you have to believe me, it never went beyond texting." I scoffed, shaking my head. "And I'm just supposed to take your word for it?" She exhaled, running a hand through her messy blonde hair. "I don't know how to make you believe me. All I can say is that I never slept with him. I swear." I wanted to believe her, but doubt had already crept into my mind, spreading like poison. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you do this? Was I not enough?" Elizabeth swallowed hard, her eyes darting away. "It wasn't about you. It was about me." She hesitated. I felt like I was losing myself in our routine. Every day was the same, James. The same conversations, the same routines. I felt like I was drowning. Her words cut deep. Our life had been good, or at least, I thought it had been. But now, I was seeing it through her eyes, and I realized that maybe I had been blind to her dissatisfaction. "So you decided to fix that by sneaking around with a bartender?" I spat. "It wasn't like that." She leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the couch. "It started as nothing. He was just someone to talk to. Someone who made me feel different. But I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," I said, my voice flat. "You hurt me more than you could ever imagine." A long silence stretched between us. Finally, Elizabeth wiped at her eyes and whispered, "What now?" I didn't have an answer. I stood up, feeling the exhaustion of the night weighing on me. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I can't even look at you right now." I grabbed a spare blanket from the hall closet and took it to the guest room. Elizabeth didn't try to stop me. The next few days were suffocating. We barely spoke, existing in the same house like strangers. I went to work, pretending like my world hadn't just collapsed. At night, I stayed in the guest room, unable to sleep beside her. Elizabeth tried to reach out, texting me during the day, leaving notes in the kitchen, cooking my favorite meals, but I ignored it all. I was too consumed by anger, by heartbreak, by the gnawing feeling that there was more to the story than she was letting on. And then, on Friday night, I decided I needed answers. Elizabeth had fallen asleep early, leaving her phone charging on the nightstand. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was crossing a line, but I couldn't help myself. My hand shook as I unlocked her phone. She had never changed her passcode, a small part of me hoping that meant she had nothing else to hide. But I was wrong. There were more messages. Not just from Jake, but from another number as well. The texts were shorter, less intimate than the ones she had exchanged with Jake, but they were still damning. "Elizabeth, I don't know if I can keep this up. James is starting to suspect something. Unknown. You knew this was risky. Just play it cool. We'll figure it out." My stomach dropped. Who the hell was this? And what did they mean by "keep this up"? I scrolled further, my pulse racing. There were only a few messages, but they were enough to confirm my worst fears. Elizabeth had been lying. This wasn't just harmless flirting. This was something bigger, something deeper, something I hadn't even begun to understand. And I was going to find out exactly what it was. Part 3. I barely slept that night. My mind raced with the messages I had read. The unknown number, the cryptic words. What was Elizabeth hiding? The pieces weren't adding up, and I was done waiting for her to tell me the truth. The next morning, I left before she woke up. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to get them. Jake. I drove straight to the bar where he worked, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wasn't even sure what I was going to say, but I had to see him, to look him in the eye and confirm what I already suspected. The bar was nearly empty when I walked in, just a couple of early drinkers nursing beers at the counter. And there he was, Jake, wiping down glasses behind the bar, looking every bit the smug, overconfident asshole I had imagined. He noticed me immediately. His smile faltered for a second before he recovered. "Hey, man, what can I get you?" I stepped up to the bar, leaning in so only he could hear. "You can start by telling me what the hell you were doing with my wife." His jaw tensed, but he didn't look surprised. He glanced around the bar before setting down the glass he was holding. "Look, I don't want any trouble." "Too late for that," I snapped. "Just tell me the truth. How long has it been going on? And don't you dare lie to me." Jake sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It wasn't serious, man. She came in a few times. We talked. Things just escalated." I clenched my fists. "Define escalated." He hesitated. "Look, we messed around, but that was all I needed to hear." I stepped forward before I even realized what I was doing. My hand shoved him back, sending him stumbling into the shelves of liquor behind him. Bottles rattled as he scrambled to his feet, wiping his lip where my push had caught him off guard. "You knew she was married," I said, my voice low and firm. "She was my wife." Jake held up his hands, wincing. "I didn't at first. When I found out, she told me it was complicated. That you two were basically over." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Yeah? Well, we are now." Before I could say another word, a bouncer stepped in between us, his presence enough to break the moment. "Take it outside," he warned. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned on my heel and walked out, my chest heaving, my mind still reeling. But as much as I resented Jake, he wasn't the real problem. Elizabeth was. I drove home, fueled by rage and the overwhelming need to make her suffer like she had made me suffer. When I walked into the house, Elizabeth was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale, her hands gripping a coffee cup so tightly I thought it might shatter. "James," she started, but I cut her off. "Save it," I said coldly. "I know everything. I want to see Jake. He told me everything." Her eyes widened with panic. "James, please. How long were you planning on lying to me?" I demanded. "How long were you going to keep sneaking around like a filthy little?" "I made a mistake," she cried, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I never meant to hurt you." I scoffed. "Yeah? Well, you did. And it gets worse, doesn't it?" Elizabeth's face twisted in confusion. "What do you mean?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper I had picked up that morning, her medical report. I had seen the email notification on her phone the night before, and after everything else, I had to know. So I logged in and printed it. I tossed it onto the table in front of her. "You gave me an STD, Elizabeth." Her face went completely white. No, that's not possible. You're telling me this isn't yours?" I pointed at the document. "You didn't get tested last week? You didn't test positive for chlamydia?" She covered her mouth, shaking her head as if she could will reality away. I didn't know. I swear, James, I didn't know." I let out a humorless laugh. "That's rich. You didn't know? How many guys were there, Elizabeth?" "How many?" She sobbed. "It was just Jake. Just him." I shook my head. "I don't believe you. And honestly, it doesn't even matter anymore. We're done." Her head snapped up, eyes wild. "No. James, please. We can fix this. I love you. I'll do anything." "You'll do nothing," I said sharply. "You lost the right to beg when you spread your legs for some bartender." She gasped, but I didn't care. I turned on my heel and walked upstairs, grabbing a duffel bag from the closet and stuffing it with clothes. I could hear her sobbing downstairs, but I felt nothing. No sympathy. No regret. Just cold, hollow anger. When I came back down, she rushed to block the door. "Please, James. Please don't leave." I met her gaze, my voice deadly calm. "You already lost me, Elizabeth. You just didn't know it yet." I pushed past her, stepping outside and slamming the door behind me. I didn't look back. Part 4. I spent the night in a motel, staring at the ceiling as the weight of everything crushed down on me. My marriage was dead. The woman I had trusted most had lied, cheated, and left me with more than just a broken heart. She had given me a disease, a physical reminder of her betrayal. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my doctor, setting up an appointment to begin treatment. The second was to a divorce attorney. I wasn't going to drag this out. By midday, I was sitting in the attorney's office, laying everything out: the infidelity, the STD, the emotional distress. He nodded, taking notes, his face unreadable. "You have a strong case for a favorable settlement," he said finally. "Given the circumstances, we can push for everything that legally belongs to you." I didn't care about the house or the savings. I just wanted to be free of her. I want the divorce filed immediately. I want her served today. The lawyer nodded. That won't be a problem. By the time I walked out of his office, I felt lighter, but the rage still simmered beneath my skin. This wasn't over, not for Elizabeth. I drove back to the house that afternoon, not to talk, but to gather my things. When I walked in, Elizabeth was sitting at the kitchen table, looking like she hadn't slept. Her hair was a mess, her face pale. She had been crying, but I felt nothing. You weren't supposed to just leave, she whispered. I ignored her, heading upstairs to the bedroom. I pulled out a suitcase and began packing, methodically moving through the room, taking only what was mine. She appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands. James, please. Can we talk? I zipped up the suitcase and turned to face her. I already did my talking, Elizabeth. To my lawyer. Her breath hitched. Lawyer. I nodded. You'll be served divorce papers today. Her hands clutched the doorframe. No, James, please. We can work through this. I made a mistake, but we can fix it. I laughed, a cold, bitter sound. You think this is something we can just fix? You lied to me, cheated on me, and gave me an STD. There is no coming back from that. Tears spilled down her face, but I didn't care. She had made her choices. Now she had to live with them. She reached out for me, but I stepped back. Don't touch me. James, please, she sobbed. I love you. I never stopped loving you. I met her eyes, my voice devoid of emotion. You loved yourself more. I pushed past her, dragging my suitcase downstairs. As I walked out the door, I heard her collapse onto the floor, her cries echoing through the house. But I didn't stop. She was nothing to me now. The fallout was swift and brutal. Elizabeth was served with the divorce papers later that evening. Her calls and messages flooded my phone, but I ignored them. She begged, pleaded, apologized. None of it mattered. Then came the real consequences. Word of her infidelity spread fast. Friends who once admired our marriage now saw her for who she really was. Her family, who had always loved me like a son, was devastated. Her mother called me in tears, apologizing for her daughter's actions, begging me to reconsider. Her father, a man who had always been proud of Elizabeth's accomplishments, refused to speak to her at all. At work, it was even worse. The law firm she worked for had a strict morality clause. Infidelity wasn't technically grounds for termination, but getting caught up in a scandal that spread across the company? That was a different story. The partners didn't want the drama, and when the whispers turned into outright discussions in the break room, Elizabeth was quietly let go. I heard about it from a mutual friend. She got fired, they told me. She's a wreck. Good. I thought that would be the end of it. But the final blow was yet to come. A week later, I got a call from her number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. What do you want? I said coldly. Her voice was barely a whisper. They're taking the house. I blinked. What? She sniffled. The mortgage, my salary covered most of it. Now that I'm not working, it hit me then. The house had been more her dream than mine. Something she had pushed for. Something her parents had helped us buy. And now, without her income, she couldn't afford it. She was losing everything. I exhaled slowly. That's not my problem. James, please. I have nowhere to go. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. You made your choices, Elizabeth. Now live with them. She sobbed, but I hung up. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt peace. She had destroyed our marriage, our trust, and my health. Now, her life was falling apart, and I wasn't going to save her. She didn't deserve saving. Part 5. The finality of it all didn't hit me immediately. I had spent weeks moving on autopilot, going through the motions of work, signing papers, cutting Elizabeth out of my life. It was only when the divorce was finalized that it truly sank in. I was free. She, on the other hand, had lost everything. Her fall had been rapid and merciless. She had lost her job, her house, and the respect of almost everyone who once cared about her. When her parents refused to support her financially, she was forced to move out of the house we had built together. The last I heard, she was staying with a distant cousin on the outskirts of town. She tried calling me a few times after that, but I never answered. Eventually, the call stopped. I wasn't cruel, I just didn't care anymore. I had wasted too much energy, too much of my life, on someone who had treated me like an afterthought. One evening, a few weeks after everything had settled, I ran into an old friend at a bar. He had been one of the last people to hear about the divorce, and his expression was a mix of pity and relief when he saw me. "Man, I still can't believe it," he said, shaking his head. "Elizabeth, of all people." I took a sip of my drink and shrugged. "Yeah, well, people show you who they really are eventually." He studied me for a moment. "You seem different." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. Because I am. I wasted years on someone who didn't deserve me. Now, I get to start over. He grinned. "Damn right. And what better way to start over than a drink on me?" I clinked my glass against his, a silent toast to new beginnings. Elizabeth, however, was still living in the wreckage of her choices. She had no job, no stable place to live, and the burden of knowing she had destroyed the best thing in her life. The cousin she was staying with eventually got tired of her moping and kicked her out, leaving her couch hopping between acquaintances who hadn't completely abandoned her. She sent me an email one night. I stared at it for a long time before finally opening it. "James, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I just needed to say this. I regret everything. Losing you was the worst thing that ever happened to me. I miss you every day, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I would do anything to take it all back. I am so sorry. I was selfish. I was weak. And now, I have nothing. I deserve nothing. But if there is even the smallest part of you that can find it in your heart to speak to me, I would give anything just to hear your voice again. Elizabeth." I read it twice. Then I deleted it. She wasn't looking for closure. She was looking for a way out of her misery. But I wasn't her savior. Not anymore. Months passed. My life became something new, something better. I reconnected with old friends, started working out again, traveled to places I had always wanted to see. For the first time in years, I felt alive. One afternoon, I ran into Elizabeth's sister at a coffee shop. She looked surprised to see me, but after a moment, she offered a sad smile. "She's not doing well," she admitted, stirring her drink. "She talks about you all the time. She knows she messed up." I nodded. "I know." She hesitated. "Would you ever consider?" "No." She sighed. "I figured. Just thought I'd ask." I finished my coffee and stood up. She made her choices. Now she has to live with them. I left without looking back. The last I ever heard of Elizabeth was through a mutual acquaintance. She had moved out of state, trying to restart her life somewhere else. But the past had a way of following her, and the weight of her mistakes never truly left. As for me, I was finally happy. The betrayal had once consumed me, but now it was just a chapter in my past, a lesson learned. I had walked through the fire, and I had come out stronger on the other side. Elizabeth had spent years looking for excitement, for something new. But in the end, all she found was regret. And me? I had found freedom. A year later, I sat in a small cafe, watching the world go by. It was a chilly autumn afternoon, the kind of day that once would have made me nostalgic for the life I had lost. But not anymore. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, both mentally and physically. Therapy had helped. New hobbies had filled the empty spaces Elizabeth had left behind. I had started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. And for the first time in a long time, I had hope. As I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. "James, it's me. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I just needed to reach out. I'm in town. Could we talk? Just once?" I stared at the message for a long moment before setting my phone down. There was nothing left to say. I paid my bill, grabbed my coat, and walked out into the crisp autumn air, leaving the past where it belonged. Behind me. The end.